Good afternoon. This is Taylor Blankenship, Senior Event and Program Specialist at NAMIC, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Automation Strategy and Roadmap. We want to give a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to review. Today's webinar will last approximately 60 minutes. A copy of the presentation is available under Handouts on the right side of your screen. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please use the live support feature in the upper right corner of your screen, and a NAMIC staff member will be happy to assist you. If for any reason we experience technical issues with our presenter, we will stay on the line until the speaker can reestablish a connection and complete the webinar. We encourage you to do so as well. Please take notice that we do operate under our antitrust statement. It is available for reference here on this slide. The antitrust policy will guide this conversation, and we ask that you adhere to the policy when submitting questions to our presenter. Along those same lines, all of our presenters are sharing their experience and opinions, which should not be construed as specific advice. We encourage you to participate in today's webinar by asking questions. If you would like to ask a question, simply submit it through the live Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Our presenter will answer as many questions as possible at the conclusion of the presentation. We would like to take a moment to thank our 2023 webinar series corporate sponsor, Holborn, for their generous support of this year's NAMIC webinar series. At this time, we would like to welcome our presenter, Murray Izenwasser. Thank you, Murray, for joining us today.
Thank you, Taylor, for kicking this off, and I want to thank NAMIC for giving me the opportunity to talk about automation strategy and creating an automation strategy and a roadmap. As we get started, a little bit about me. I've been doing strategy for many years. I've been here at Oz for approaching 7 years, and I'm our SVP of Digital Strategy. I work with our clients on their digital strategies. When I say digital, a lot of people think marketing. I do have a very strong marketing background, but we really focus much more on digital as in technology. Here at Oz, we not only do automation, we do application development, data and analytics, and integration, because you can't do any of those things anymore without having them cross over. And so all these things really work together. Who this presentation is for, it's really interesting when it comes to automation versus other types of technologies that we would implement, where there's specific groups that we would be focusing on. And you'll see in one of the slides how it's a large part of the organization that there's a large group of people in organizations that are leading this initiative. So it could be someone in line of business, it could be IT, it could be an innovation team. There's a lot of people that this, I believe, would benefit from this. So as you go back to your offices and you want to speak to people about this, those are, it's really where in your organization the automation efforts are being led. The goal of today is to give some background of the types of things you should be looking for, way to think about creating a roadmap for automation. And the big surprise, I think, for most people is that, it's not going to be surprising what you need to do to create that roadmap. A strategy is a strategy. Everyone's looking for a magical solution to all of these things, has been my experience. And it's really never magical. It's a process of work you need to do, questions you need to ask. And, there's no magic to it, although there's oftentimes a lot of hard work. Before we get started, a couple of definitions. One thing I'm not really going to talk about today is things like ChatGPT, large language models, and generative AI models. A little bit, and we talk about artificial intelligence in a minute or two. But let's talk about what these different things are, just to make sure we're all level set. RPA, robotic process automation, that's pretty much straightforward automation, using a software robot to replicate a human's actions. That can be ramped up. We're doing some work with one of our clients on moving reinsurance contracts from one system to another. And as that ramps up, we turn on more robots and they do the work for us. IPA, on the other hand, is where we add in some intelligence, and that's a wide range of what the intelligence is that we could add. It's a huge spectrum of allowing the automations to start making some decisions based on data, based on previous work, based on previous knowledge. Machine learning is when you start implementing learning algorithms into these processes. It allows computers to learn and improve without being explicitly programmed. It's getting easier to start implementing some of these things. You have some machine learning platforms that are very specific to a very specific piece of the value chain, at least in insurance and other industries. And some are more general machine learning. Both AWS and Azure have machine learning services that can be integrated into cloud solutions that are developed on their platforms. And people use AI kind of interchangeably with machine learning. I don't. I always want to make that distinction. We haven't truly achieved what we call AGI, artificial general intelligence. Even the large language models, the generative AIs, the ChatGPTs, the Claude.AIs, they simulate intelligence. They're basically using statistics to figure out what the next word should be in a stream of words, and it's giving you a response. So I just wanted to level set as we're talking about these, what they are, because we're going to come back to some of these concepts as we move forward. So let's really start with a poll. With a quick poll, what we want to really do whenever we're looking at creating a roadmap is to define where we are. Because if we don't know where we are, how do we know how to get to where you want to be? On the other side of that, if you don't know where you want to go, differences that make what road you choose. But go ahead and answer the poll. Looks like some in production is so far by far the winner. All right, we'll give it another couple of seconds. Some in production, and it seems no, but considering implementation. Interesting. So what I'm going to go through in this first part of this presentation is I actually did a poll. I sent it out to myself and one of my colleagues, to about 500 of our closest friends in the insurance industry, and got back a decent response. Not huge. It's a decent response, enough to make this statistically okay. I think the results are more directional, although I think all data is directional in nature. But when we asked this of the people who responded to the survey, the survey, by the way, was 17 questions. I'll talk about, there's two different groupings, those, and I drew a line for no apparent reason of $1 billion in gross written premium. Those are large insurance companies. $1 billion and under $1 billion are small, and so we'll talk about some of the differences there. I did do some analysis over the weekend beyond what's in this presentation, and there are some differences between the large companies and the small companies. Probably not a big surprise. But what we found was that overall, when we combine the two groups, about 45% of the organizations have many automation technologies. We didn't define that. People defined that for themselves as they were taking the survey. And 34% have some in production. Very small percentage are not considering implementing any automation technologies. About 14%, which kind of these numbers, might skew a little more towards what we would see if we looked at just the smaller companies, with a larger percentage having some in production. Another way to look at this is, of those companies, fully 80% have some form of automation solution in production. That's a huge number for any implementation of any technology across an industry. And I think we would see that regardless of the size of the sample that we would be looking at for a question like this. So like I said, the survey had 17 questions. We're not going to go through all of them, just most of them. So I'm going to go fairly quickly over the next couple of questions, just to make sure we have time at the end for your questions and to talk about actually creating, to look at the maturity model and then creating at least the initial steps of how you approach creating a roadmap for automation. When we asked the companies that responded how long they have been using automation technologies, the majority of organizations, regardless of size, have been doing this for over 2 years. There's a smaller percentage that started 1 to 2 years ago. And what's really interesting about this, I thought, was that none of the people who responded had their company started within the last 12 months. They either started 1 to 2 years ago, or a small percentage are not doing any automation. So really interesting that nobody has started recently. So I think, though, for organizations that have not yet started, I had a client, a chief marketing officer, CMO of a very large organization, who once said to me, or used to say all the time, and she once said, Murray, when I was saying we should do this and we should do that, and she looked at me and said, Murray, the second mouse gets the cheese. And her view was, I'm going to let other people figure it out, and then I'm going to do something even better and get the cheese. And I think there's an opportunity right now for those who have been not doing as much to maybe do some really cool and interesting things, especially with how technology has advanced in the past couple of years. Another way to look at it is that of those who have implemented, have been doing this, the vast majority have been doing it for greater than 2 years, and a smaller percentage between 1 and 2 years. So, if you haven't done any, you might think that you're a little bit behind. Maybe you are, but again, I think there's a great opportunity regardless of the size of the organization, especially with some of the tools that are out there now. We started asking about the benefits that the company has experienced using automation. One of the notes on this question, I realized after the survey was done that I had forgotten to add as an option increased revenue as a benefit. But when you look at the results, increased efficiency was by far one of the top benefit that organizations had seen. And I would actually put that reduced errors and better data quality go hand in hand. So those two together would probably be second, with cost savings being third from those. I'm not sure where revenue would have fallen in, but I think it would have been somewhere there in the top of the options we were given. One of the things, though, when we look at how do they measure success, efficiency is top again, return on investment, that's why I believe revenue would have been top when they would have said on the benefits, because they measure it based on an ROI, savings of time, customer satisfaction is how they measure it, error reduction and down. But what's interesting is when we look at both of them together, you can see that increased efficiency is top both for how it's measured and also the benefits they're actually getting. So it's about efficiency for a large number of organizations. But you start talking about cost savings and return on investment and cost avoidance. I mean, that's huge also. So it's a lot of costs. Reducing errors is next. And then there's a couple of things. They measure it based on improved satisfaction or customer satisfaction. 10% of the organizations measured that, and they were allowed to choose more than one on this question. 10% said that they measure based on customer satisfaction, but the benefits don't really align with that, were only 5%. Said that they actually had a benefit of improved customer satisfaction. I think that's really interesting. And I think that might be a mismatch between the companies were trying to measure and the types of solutions they were implementing as part of their automation journey. And then those poor employees, boy, no one's really measuring their satisfaction and the benefits that they're getting, and Richard Branson says, his view is you take care of your employees and your employees will take care of your customers. So I think there's an opportunity there to focus on automation solutions, focused on employees, to allow them to do their jobs better, to do better jobs, to become more analysts than data entry people, to provide a different level of service to customers. I think it's really interesting that is so far down in both of those charts. What are the main tools that your company is using? I think if we had asked this question a year ago, we would have gotten a different answer. I think that this UiPath would have been a bigger slice of the pie. I was actually kind of surprised that Microsoft Power Automate is the #1 tool that organizations are using. That would not have been so a year ago. And I know, talking with our automation team, that was their view a year ago, and now they're doing more and more and more with our clients. What I also found interesting, which until I did the survey and I saw, some of the comments, and I questioned some of the people about their responses, and it was an anonymous survey. It was only if they told me that I could contact them, did I? So the vast majority of people didn't tell me who they are. So I don't know who responded to most of them, but the other is actually a share of that, a large share of that, are the automation tools that are part of the Guidewires and other platforms that they use. Has become a much, much larger piece of the automation tool set that organizations are using. And I think a year or so ago, that would have been a much smaller number. When I asked about the automation implementation strategy, 22% of the organizations are going it alone, doing it all in-house. The vast majority are doing a hybrid. Sometimes they're working with vendors, sometimes they're doing it themselves. A smaller percentage are always collaborating with a partner, whether it's the actual tool provider or consulting firm like Oz. And 12% have fully outsourced to a vendor. And I thought this was really interesting, but again, another way to look at it is that almost 80% are working with a partner of some kind. Much smaller percentage are doing it all themselves. Now, what I want to go back and look at is the size of the organization that selected this. And are the larger organizations doing that? Is it organizations or ones who have started a longer time ago? Like, who is it? And I don't have the data for that yet. I haven't been able to do that analysis based on the survey of who's doing it all in-house. Because I think this is really interesting, or could be interesting, as you look at the pathway that organizations go when they start versus when they have started to really implement, versus as they're expanding either the technology and complexity, or across the organization, the work that they're doing around automation. All right, talked about how are organizations looking to expand or improve their capabilities in the future. The numbers 1 and 3, investing in more advanced technology and integrating AI or ML technologies. Those are very similar. I would combine those two. So fully 40% are, and we'll talk about this later on in the presentation when we start talking about the maturity model, are looking to start implementing more complex technologies as part of their future plans. And then the other larger one is expanding automation across the organization. So 1 and 3, those are basically the same. 2 is expanding. But I want you to keep this slide in mind later on, like I said, when we start talking about the automation maturity model. That ties in directly with the model and what we're seeing when we start graphing where people are in the model, which I'm going to ask you to do actually as part of this presentation. And I think these bottom 2 are important. Well, there's much smaller numbers, 3% and 4%, developing a comprehensive automation governance framework and establishing a dedicated automation center of excellence. That's when we start seeing organizations really becoming mature around automation. Is they're implementing governance, they're implementing a COE, really focusing on the structure of how automation occurs in the organization. And I think if a year from now, if we were to do the survey again, this would become, these are going to have much larger numbers. I think if we did this a year ago, I'm not even sure that these would show up on the chart. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a maturation of automation within the organizations. We'll talk a little bit later about automation sprawl. I think organizations are starting to rein that in a little bit or take control of it. Whereas, we see a lot of shadow IT beginning to implement or implementing solutions in certainly larger organizations. All right. When we looked at the what are you planning on doing in terms of growth or staying the same? And there were other questions of we're going to reduce. Nobody's reducing. Fully 100% of the people who responded said they were either going to grow their automation or stay the same, at least at the same level they were at. But 85% are planning on doing more. So this is across all sizes of organizations. Everyone is planning to do more than what they are doing, regardless of where they are now in that journey. Not very surprising, to be honest, to me. When I saw this result. This next one, though, was actually very surprising. I wasn't sure where the answer was going to be, but I was not expecting this. When we asked in the survey, who is leading the automation initiatives, I really felt that there would be one organization, whether it was IT or operations or somebody, that in most organizations was leading these initiatives. And it's not. It's really, when you look at it from an industry perspective, it's kind of across the board. Everything from the line of business to the executives to the operations team to IT. This one surprised me even further. It's actually the innovation or the strategy team leading it more than any other piece of the organization. And I probably shouldn't have been surprised about this, because I literally just a couple of weeks ago completed a project for a sizable $3 billion plus insurance carrier, working with their innovation team to put a framework in place for how they do innovation, how they're going to track it, and how they're going to decide what to do. There's more and more and more focus across the industry. And I don't think I'm saying anything that you all don't already know around innovation. And automation is really, welded into innovation. The two go hand in hand because of the things you need to do to really automate processes and make sure those things you're automating are improvements, and you're not just automating a bad process and now you have an automated bad process. And the things that you need to do with change management and innovation and getting the people behind the things that you're trying to do. We literally just finished a project doing this, so I probably shouldn't have been as surprised as I was that was now the number one group by a little bit that's leading these initiatives. But there's no one group within the organization across the industry that's really leading the initiatives. So again, that was kind of a little surprising to me. And then we asked about what challenges people were having, and there's a lot. Everything was somewhere or another a challenge. Everything from cybersecurity risks. As you start automating things, there's definitely a risk from a cyber perspective. Organizational culture, and I'll show you some of at the end of the presentation, some of the quotes that we got. Just a handful of them that talk about organizational culture and employees and happiness, or maybe not so happiness. And I think that's something that really needs to be taken into account as you're starting to go down or are on that journey of automation. Proving what the ROI is, talent gaps, organizations not having the talent to implement these solutions. Insurance products can be fairly complex. How do you automate something, that's buried within a 72-page, PDF, where there's charts and tables? That's, can be really complex to automate some of those things. As you start implementing machine learning and AI models and start going down that pathway, the accuracy of those models, the explainability of those models, right? How do you explain, if you implemented as part of the automation, an AI model that makes underwriting decisions? How do you explain to a regulator how those decisions were made? These are things you have to really think of before you start heading down that road. And I know there are some states that are starting to issue some, I wouldn't call them guidelines, but some information about this. Standardizing processes, the upfront costs, right? Everyone thinks, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get amazing return on this investment. Well, those upfront costs can be quite extensive to get to the point where you start getting that return. We worked with one client where we were automating the pieces of their reinsurance function. Once we turned it on, they saw some tremendous benefits, but it took us 6 months to get there because, again, reinsurance contracts are complex. How do you automate that? Data quality. For automation to work, especially as you start implementing more advanced automation solutions, data quality is so important. If you have bad data and you're relying on that bad data to allow these automation solutions to make decisions, but the data is bad, I mean, that's a huge issue. So there may have to be, for some of the things that people want to implement, a data cleanup process that occurs first. Regulatory compliance, we kind of talked about that a little bit. Change management, maintenance and upkeep, scaling these solutions, depending on the technologies and the way you build them, the automation solutions, scaling them might be an issue. How do you turn on the more bots to handle higher needed throughput? So you have to make sure that these things can scale. How do you scale it to other parts of the organization? And then very often there's a vendor dependence. Now, as a consulting firm, that's good and that's bad, right? We obviously like to have long-term relationships with clients, but it becomes a point where we like our clients to start taking ownership of the things that are being done. And being dependent on a vendor from the carrier's perspective, that's something that you really have to understand. How do you build up the skills internally? Oh, so wait, before I show this, so I actually took someone I know. She works for actually a very large mutual organization, and she is in charge of the brokerage channel. And I took her through this to get her feedback. And when I showed her this, I'm like, well, what do you think the number one issue is? She immediately went legacy systems. And that was what we found, is integrating to legacy systems is the number one challenge that organizations are facing. Is a number of these legacy systems, especially as they're older, it's harder and harder to integrate to them. Even some of the more modern ones that are in the cloud that have, a closed garden for their data. How do you integrate to them? How do you create automation around them, right? So that's the number one issue. But that was actually when I saw the results for the survey. And I mean, I'm not trying to, toot the Oz horn here, but that was a little surprising to me. And I think part of it is we have such a strong integration team that it's not an issue for the most part for us, but it's by far by double the next two issues around implementing automation solutions. And the next two being budget and resistance to change. Those were not surprising. And then the third one down would be scalability, and then very close, and having the expertise to implement solutions. So, it's really interesting that the number one issue is a technology issue, but the next, almost all the rest, and maybe this is a form of how the question was asked, are kind of organizational and people issues, right? Budget, resistance to change, scalability, I guess, is more of a technology issue, but expertise, change management, all being issues. All right, so which were the areas? The first one of the questions we asked to implement automation. If you guys want to respond in the discussion forum, what you're the first place in your organization that automation was implemented, and then I can take you to what the survey said. So down there in the bar, you should have a little button that says discussion forum. please go ahead and enter one of these, or if it's a different one, or other, or none. All right, we have a claims processing. Interesting. Billing, a policy admin, underwriting. Give it a minute. I know sometimes it takes a little time for it to pop up. All right. Interesting. Data and analytics. Billing, product development. Really? Oh, I'd love to have a discussion around that. Of how that automation. Doug, would love to have that discussion. Find out what you guys did for product development as your first foray into automation. All right, 30 more seconds or so. So we get some more responses. Interesting. Well, when we in the survey that we sent out, number one place that people start is underwriting, which really actually surprised me. But then when I thought about it, didn't. Next is claims processing and customer service, and then marketing and communications and policy admin. So it did kind of surprise me a little bit that underwriting was number one when I thought about it. Maybe not so much. But what's interesting is we then asked the question of which area has the most automation now. So why don't you guys go ahead and take a look at and enter into the discussion forum where the most automation is occurring, whether it's the same as where you started or different. Yeah, so Kathy, it looks like you started in claims in your organization, and now it's policy admin has the most. And as we'll see, that's those two. There's a lot of movement towards those. But another minute. So like I said, sometimes it takes a little while for these to come up in the discussion forum. Anybody else? All right. When we asked this question in the survey, the area that has the most automation, claims processing and underwriting, are tied for first, with policy admin being a close second. When we compare the two, you can see some movement. I mean, underwriting is still at the top. Claims processing is still second. Customer service, which was where people, a larger number of people started, has moved down a little bit. Marketing and communications, which is where 1 out of 10 people started, has gone way down. And then you have policy admin, might not have been first, but it's really a lot of focus there. And then data management and analytics coming up. And I saw somebody said that they started there. So that's interesting. Fewer people started there. What's really interesting to me about this is some of these down here, HR, someone said they started in product development. That's why I would love to find out what you guys did. Legal, these areas down here, in terms of the first place to try something, might be a great opportunity for a pilot, right? But nobody really seems to be choosing those, which I thought was interesting, right? I mean, I know when you're doing a pilot, you want to do, it really depends on, I guess, who has the budget for it. But the fact that nobody really started there. And I think those are great opportunities in some of those support organizations, finance, some of the support organizations to do pilots for automation. We've done a lot of work with invoicing as the first place that people start. So it's interesting that really wasn't the focus for most organizations. And as you can see, the big lead that underwriting had when where to start, that's kind of gone away after, I guess, 1 to 5 years of doing automation, that lead that it has. And it's kind of evened out with claims processing and policy admin. So it's really interesting, the journey that people go on. All right, so based on all that, what does the average insurance company look like? The average insurance company, regardless of size, and I think there would be some differences, again, if you looked at smaller versus larger, greater than 2 years with quite a few in production. They're really focused on increased efficiency, but also better quality and cost savings. They're using Power Automate, Microsoft Power Automate, or the policy admin system automation tools. They are working with outside companies. Various groups across the organization are leading these initiatives. Their main challenge is integrating with existing systems. They measure success by ROI and process efficiency. Started in underwriting, but expanded to claims, policy admin, and customer service. And they're expanding by, going back to those first couple of slides, both implementing more advanced technology and additional areas in the organization. So that's the average insurance company. So this is where we're starting from, kind of as an industry. I mean, your mileage may vary, but I think that for most organizations, this would paint a fairly accurate picture with some slight adjustments. All right, now that we have, here's where we're starting, let's talk about the maturity model, which the maturity model has 2 main factors, adoption versus complexity. And so let's talk about those. In the maturity model, there's 5 levels focusing on adoption. Initial, developing, defined, managed, and optimized from lowest to highest. Initial is really not using any form of automation or small pilots, just getting started, experimenting with it. The operations that are being focused on are primarily manual. There's no strategy or governance. Projects are isolated from projects or proof of concepts, and they're really aimed at understanding the potential benefits and challenges. The developing, which is number 2, there are some automation technologies in production, but the implementation is limited in scope, very specific organization processes or departments, not yet integrated across the organization, seeing some benefits, but there's a lack of a cohesive organizational strategy. Defined, there's a clearly defined strategy for automation in place. Established processes and governance and ways to go about it, and budgeting, resources are all part of that strategy. Implemented in various parts of the organization and well integrated with operations. There's room for improvement and scaling, and there's a potential at this point to leverage more advanced automation technologies. And from a managed perspective, which is the 4th level, scaling across the entire organization. So they're really managing it. They're really focusing on how do we automate as much as we can? How do we integrate it with our processes and functions? There's a continuous monitoring and improvement based on that data that comes out of the monitoring. Performance metrics, feedback, very mature approach to automation, strong governance with a very well-defined automation strategy. And then from an optimized perspective, and again, this is talking about is how has the organization adopted automation? It's an advanced automation capabilities integrated across the organization. It's starting to really leverage machine learning, AI, other advanced technologies, continuous improvement and optimization, continuous focus on innovation, very strategic focus. And it's starting to deliver significant business value through automation. So I want you all to think about where your organization would fall across this scale of 1 initial and 5 optimized. You don't really see a lot of the optimized organizations out in the wild. I personally haven't met one yet, but they are out there. When we asked organizations where they were on adoption as part of the survey, this is what came back. The vast majority of people were in developing or defined. More people said they were in managed than defined. And I think, either, the people that I sent it out to, work for very advanced organizations. But I think that might have been a little aspirational. But, these are the results with a very, very small number of respondents saying that they're at optimized. So kind of interesting results. I would really love to dig deeper into those in terms of size of organization and have some conversations with people who, especially the ones who said managed, but of course it was an anonymous survey, so I really won't be able to reach out to them. So I want you all to remember your adoption number because we are going to come back to it. So write it down on a sticky or put it into the discussion forum if you want, so you'll remember it and go back to it. But remember from adoption, are you 1 through 5? And the average organization across all of the people that responded to the survey was kind of right about there, high 2s in terms of adoption. In terms of complexity, which is the other factor in the maturity model, similar, 1 through 5, basic. We're automating simple rule-based tasks, very repetitive tasks being automated, looking to reduce human error, focusing on streamlining, automating email responses, simple data entry, basic report generation, invoicing, things like that. The second level, developing a little more complicated tasks, might extend to entire processes. It's beginning to interact with multiple systems across the organization, pulling data from different sources. It's not something that every solution, but they're starting to get a little more complex in terms of the tasks that they do. And it's adding more value by enhancing accuracy and speed of operations. The third level is proficient. We're managing fairly complex tasks needing advanced decision-making. Or a big rules engine, not big in terms of size, but a strong rules engine. It's integrating with other systems. Exceptions are handled, errors are handled. It analyzes large data volumes to do the automations it needs to do, and it provides personalized and responsive customer service potentially using data from multiple systems. Complex, multifaceted tasks, high autonomy. Involves multiple systems, complex integrations, making real-time decisions based on dynamic data. Capable of following complex rules around efficiency and strategic decision-making. Fewer and fewer of those that I would see in the wild. And then from an expert perspective, which is the top level, handles highly complex tasks, advanced decision-making, leveraging AI or machine learning systems. It's capable of learning over time, adapting the actual processes that are automated over time, not just adapting the decision-making. Highly complex processes are managed autonomously. Really don't see organizations, like I said, in the wild with those at that level. And when we asked in the survey, no surprise, it kind of skewed a little bit lower down. The vast majority of organizations were developing. None said that they were at the expert level, even that advanced, that 15%. I'd love to have a conversation and find out what they're actually doing. The average organization in the complexity piece of the model, lower than the automation. Now, is it skewed because of the larger organizations? Possibly. But that's an analysis that I haven't done yet. So as I ask you to remember your adoption number, I want you to remember your complexity number. Where do you guys fit in that range from 1 through 5 on complexity. So now you should have two numbers. You should have an adoption number and you should have a complexity number. And now what I want you to do is to find your box with those two numbers. Here's adoption, 1 through 5, and here's complexity, 1 through 5. And then, you know, if your adoption was 3, your complexity was 2, your box number is 9. So why don't you go ahead and take a quick minute, and we don't have a lot of time left yet. I want to go through this, but take a quick minute while I'm going through, put the box number that you have for your organization in there, in the discussion forum. We have an 8. So the way that this works out is there's 4 groupings. You're all familiar with the 4 quadrants. We have initiators who are kind of just getting started. We have adopters who have been doing it for a while, and their focus is really on spreading it out through the organization. We have optimizers that are focused on specific areas of the organization, but are making things more complex. And then we have the innovators that are doing much more complex things and have really focused across the organization. So we have an 8, a 5, a 9, 2. We have 2 5s, an 8, and a 9. I mean, that's really about where most organizations in that area, right around here, would fit. Right, so again, initiators, they're just getting started, basic tasks, doing what I call easy automations. The first one is never easy. Taking a fragmented approach, starting to see some benefits, and maybe it's a learning opportunity by seeing what other people are doing. Again, that whole second mouse gets the cheese thing. What are other people doing? What can we learn from what they're doing? And then from adopters, which again are starting to spread it out across the organization. They're broadening the implementation. Customer interactions are coming into play. It's all about efficiency and streamlining. The focus is on simplification over complication. And they're starting to really see some tangible room for benefits and still some room for growth, though, if they're up here in that adopters. Tangible benefits, growth, adding more and more complex implementations. Optimizers, on the other hand, you know, they have advanced integration. They're using intelligent process automation, intelligent OCR, AI and ML systems are starting to really become part of their solutions. Analytics is a huge investment for people that are organizations rather that are in optimizers, and they're really realizing benefits, but they also have room to grow, but they're going to be able to grow by taking the solutions that they've implemented and moving them more across the organization. And the innovators, leveraging advanced solutions, focuses on upskilling and governance. It's an organization-wide approach, significant benefits, and a true commitment to innovation. Again, don't see a lot of those in the wild. And when we look at the organizations, at least those that answered the survey, and I think this is going to be fairly accurate, when we looked at both large and small insurance companies, this is kind of where they fit. The small are still, for the most part, in initiators. And again, this is an average, so there'll be some up here, there'll be some over here, some down here. The larger organizations are a little bit ahead in terms of how far across the organization and the types of solutions. There are some that would probably be over here in the larger organizations, and they're up here, maybe even touching more in some of the green, the innovators. All right. So creating an automation roadmap. I know I'm going really quickly. I want to leave time for some questions. Strategic versus tactical. On this slide, I just want to mention this. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. There's a term that I use, which is called automation sprawl. People get a taste of automation and they see someone else doing it, and they implement a solution, and before you know it, it's all over the organization, different platforms, different organizations implementing it, different standards, and you really need to guard against it and harness it. I've seen this time and again. So in terms of creating the roadmap, it all, from my perspective, goes back to when you say, where do we get started? Back to the strategy. What is your organizational strategy? Some organizations, when you look at their vision and mission statements and their strategic drivers and the types of things they're trying to do, is really focused around creating a great place to work and great employee experiences. Others are more focused on creating great customer experiences. Some are much more focused on increasing revenue. Some are much more focused on curbing costs. All of these factors go into deciding where to get started and where to go. And you really, and my clients hear me say this ad infinitum, you always have to take that step back. And I do, I truly say this all the time. And you have to ask fundamental questions of who are we, what are we trying to do before you decide what you're going to do, specifically in this case around automation, but around every other initiative also, right? And that'll help give you the answer of where you need to go. So if you're in the process or you're not in the process, you're just getting started, you have to align to the business strategy. You have to answer those fundamental questions. What are we trying to do as an organization, and where should we now focus? You have to identify and prioritize processes. You have to define goals and metrics. Select the right tools and technologies to get you where you want to go. At the end, I'll talk about future casting. Where do you want to be 5 years from now, and how are we going to get there? What do I need to do today if you work yourself backwards to today? You need to develop a pilot project, one that's meaty enough that it has some good visibility, but not so meaty enough that underwriting can't work across the organization. And someone I know, they had an abysmal failure a number of years ago. And for 2 years, nobody in the organization could mention automation. They bit off too much as their first pilot project. And then once you have developed that pilot, how well did it go? What do we need to adjust? What can we learn from it? How can we scale it, either within that function or to other functions? And how should we adjust the strategy to stay aligned with the evolving business strategy? Again, no different than if you're doing anything else not specific to automation. And then if you're already on your way, not much different, except let's evaluate the existing programs, see what we have, what has worked, what hasn't, what can we learn, align to the business strategy. And then you need to make that decision of where you want to go in the model. Do you want to go broad, or do you want to go deep? Going broad means expand automation out through the entire organization. Going deep is let's build some really interesting advanced solutions for specific functional areas within the organization. I don't believe you can do both at the same time. Doesn't mean if you choose one, you can't be doing some of the other, but you can't do both. And then based on that decision, you need to identify those new projects. You need to define goals and metrics. How are we going to measure them going forward? Select the right tools and technologies based on that broader, deep decision. Scale them up once they're completed, and then really focus again on that continuous improvement. Evaluate the existing programs and continue to go around. All right, a couple of quick quotes, and then we'll turn it over to questions. We're finding it more difficult from a cost standpoint to either incorporate or move away from our legacy system. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to that whole integration with legacy systems. It's harder and harder to do both. They're doing more offshoring. They're reducing staff. They have that because they didn't probably have a governance structure, a change management, piece of this. They're starting to alienate employees. Same with the other comment up here. Be clear with your employees. It's not an attempt to get rid of them. It should not be an attempt to get rid of them. It should be, we're going to give you tools to make your jobs more interesting, turn you from data entry into analysts, keep and retain people with better jobs, that they have better job satisfaction. That should be your focus, at least from an employee perspective. Employee development has stopped. I mean, these are some of the pitfalls that you're going to see if you don't really take that step back. And then, we are in the infancy and need to implement more to become more efficient in their process. Just some of the quotes that we got that I thought were interesting from the survey. All right, I'm going to turn it over for some questions for a couple of minutes. I'll answer as many as I can. And then I'll come back with some final thoughts.
All right. If you have any questions for Murray, please submit them through the live Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen. We will address all questions that are received. And I will kick us off, Murray.
Sure.
It seems that a lot of companies get started with underwriting.
Mhm.
Should we really get started there?
That's a great question. Um, I think it goes back to when I was talking about you need to look at this, especially if you're getting started. What are you trying to achieve? Underwriting may well be the correct place to get started based on that, right? You can learn a lot by focusing on a key and critical function in the value chain of insurance. You can also learn a lot the other way by doing that. And so I wish I had a good answer for that. The only answer I can give you is it depends. It depends on strategically what are you trying to do as an organization with automation. And nobody, most organizations, they don't ask those fundamental questions of what are we trying to do before they get started. Someone says we need to automate a process, let's choose that one, and they go and they automate it. So possibly, my final answer, possibly not.
How do we identify a good pilot for automation or for expanding the complexity of an existing automation with new technology?
That's another great question. It kind of goes back to the previous one. Good pilots need to be able to have high enough visibility that people in the organization, both across the organization and certainly up the organization, are looking and watching to see what is going on. But it should not be something which is mission critical to the organization. And it's a balancing act between those two things, high visibility, but not mission critical. Where is that sweet spot? And again, going back to the strategy of what we're trying to do organizationally, that could add that third leg to the stool to try and make that decision. You don't want to automate something that's so simple that, it doesn't have any impact in the organization. You don't want to go to the other extreme. And it's that middle sweet spot, maybe kind of a little before the middle of the sweet spot of where that initial pilot should be. And then you need to make sure it really succeeds. Like you really need to make sure it succeeds. Or like I said, there's this one organization, someone I know, and she was telling me the story how for 2 years, no one could even mention automation. And now they're back. There are some pieces of the organization around the world that are really in the upper right-hand quadrant. But it was a 2-year hiatus from doing any automation because of the failure they bit off way too much. They were trying to automate an entire product line, and it was just too much.
Thank you. You talk about creating an organizational strategic focus, but in our company, there are a lot of teams implementing automation. How do we rationalize the two?
Well, so on the one hand, you're lucky if that's the case, because automation is already happening. But I think if that's the case, and there are a lot of teams that are implementing it, I think it's time to start thinking about governance. I think it's time to create a process for understanding what's being automated, why it's being automated, asking fundamental questions, asking the teams that are automating them to how are we going to measure success, right? What is that? Is it an increase in production? Is it a decrease in cost? Is it an increase in revenue? Is it a lower employee turnover, for that group? Like, what are we actually? I think there's fundamental questions that can be asked of everyone doing it that won't necessarily stop what they're doing, but will make them think about things at a different level to make sure or help ensure that they are more successful. And I think if that's what's going on in the organization, then I think that's the way to go.
Well, thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So, Murray, I'm going to turn it back over to you for some concluding thoughts.
Okay, so embrace the inevitable. This is happening not only industry-wide, but across all industries, automation in some form, especially in the insurance industry. It's starting to happen more and more. I'm going to harp again on strategic alignment. You have to align, like you do with every other type of initiative. You have to align your automation efforts with your organizational strategy. What are you trying to achieve, and how can automation help achieve those? That's what I work with my clients on, is helping them do that alignment. It's focused on people and culture. Data is king. Data is king, queen, court jester. Data is everything. Experiment, learn, scale, crawl, walk, run, really important. As you start implementing more complex solutions, regulatory and compliance are really important to understand. You're going to have an issue, as we saw, it's the number one issue, is integrating with some of your legacy systems, establish good partnerships with your vendors, and really spend time future casting the automation vision. Where do we want to be 5 years from now organizationally? How can automation help us achieve that? And what do we need to do over those next, maybe 5 years in this day and age is too far out. Maybe it's 3 years. What can we do? What's the plan? What are the steps with timings that we need to do to get to that point? I think that's so important. Most organizations don't actually do that. And then, listen, I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. It's really near and dear to my heart, and I wish you all success. My information is right there. If you'd like, when I do get the final write-up of the survey done, there's my email address, or on LinkedIn. Please connect with me. Be happy to send out the final report when we have it, which should be weeks, month-ish from now. Thank you all.
And thank you, Murray. Before we wrap up for today, NAMIC has planned a variety of in-person and virtual events. For more information, please visit www.namic.org/edu/calendar. And to access the recording of today's webinar, simply log back into this webinar portal and navigate to today's session on the timeline. You will then see a link to view the recording. If you have any issues accessing this recording or any other webinar recording, please email events@namic.org. Please note, webinar recordings are made available 24 hours after the webinar airs live. When you exit the session today, you will see a pop-up with a session survey. Your feedback is valuable to us, so please take a brief moment to fill this out. We would like to thank Murray one final time for taking the time to share his expertise with us this afternoon. And we thank all of you for attending our webinar today. Have a wonderful afternoon.